And welcome to the Unhinged History Podcast, the podcast where moments before one of us was taking an everything shower and having a grand old time before recognizing that they were losing track of time.
The
I'm
other one of
Theresa.
us just got off work. Ooh, I cut you off. I'm sorry. I'm
No, you're
Angie.
fine. I mean, this is honestly, this is what you can expect. We're going to carry on like this for the next hour.
Here we are, peeps.
The whole premise of this podcast, if you are tuning in for the very first time, is the two of us compulsively learn history stories on our own. And then each week we join forces and tell each other the story that we just researched in detail. We're going to pretend the other one may have never heard it.
I like to hope. I don't know. I'm still vying for the day we tell the same story.
Honestly, I feel like this might be the day since we both really fought hard to get our episode to publish either the day before, day of,
Weekend.
yeah,
Yeah.
like this is the moment we need to tell this story because it is time sensitive, and that makes me a little nervous.
I am excited.
Ah,
Yeah.
so who went first last time?
I don't remember. I think it was you. Because you said something about not having a oh no, maybe it was me. You were the palate cleanser last time.
Why would I be a palate cleanser?
Because you didn't have a sad story. You had a jolly romp.
Ah, no, you're right. You're right. I shared the tale of Clara the Rhinoceros.
You sure did.
I had to like quickly research what was episode 46. Where am I? What color is the sky in my world?
We have a
Okay.
yellow sun.
So do you want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay. Before I tell you my topic or read you my sources, I'm going to give you kind of a modern day premise. Like if
Okay.
this were to happen in today's times,
Okay.
this would be the situation. And then I'm going to have you guess what I'm covering.
Okay.
Okay. So to modernize the event that I'm covering, I want you to imagine, Angie, that you and I are smugglers of goods,
Okay.
and we are desperately afraid of legal goods coming into the market, flooding it, and then ruining our ability to sell things. So, with that in mind, imagine you and I breaking into the Sacramento airport,
Okay.
going to the cargo hold, and destroying over $1 million in merchandise of a publicly traded company that our senators hold a lot of stock in.
Because and that was the legal goods and we
The
don't want
legal
that
goods.
flooding the market,
We
so
don't want that flooding the market.
we want to sell our, for lack
Our
of a better word, moonshine.
basically, our equivalent of moonshine.
Okay.
And we
I am
destroy
so
over $1 million
excited.
and impact senators to do this.
Okay. Jail
What am
time.
I covering?
I don't want to say anything because it might be my story.
No,
I don't think
Angie.
it is. I don't think it is because my story doesn't mention the destruction of anything.
Okay, then it definitely isn't, because
But I'm
destruction
very
is the key point in
okay.
my story.
Okay. Let's see. Are we trying to sell avocados?
No,
Okay. Are we trying? So this is senators are involved?
the equivalent of, like, I'm having to, do modern equivalent here, modeling.
Oh, right. So this isn't something that happened in like the last 25 years.
No,
Okay.
no.
We go in and we destroy all the loaves of bread in the bakery because bread is contraband in certain countries, when it is not governed by the government, governed by the government by the royal family.
I feel like this is getting real weird. Do you want me to just tell you what I'm covering?
Yeah.
The Boston Tea Party.
I'm so excited. Not the story I thought you were going to tell.
Okay. So my sources, the Jamestown Settlement Museum, the Tea Act and the Boston Tea Party, Britannica.com. I looked up the Townsend article, or the Townsend Acts, the Boston Tea Party Ship and Museum. They had an article on tea smuggling, a journal article from the Early American Studies Anglo-Dutch Revolution, spring of 2012, volume 10, number 2. Article titled, Did Dutch Smugglers Provoke the Boston Tea Party by Benjamin L. Karp. And the podcast History Doesn't Suck. They covered the Boston Tea Party. All of those are where I'm starting.
I love this for me. I love this for you. I love this for our listeners.
And I love the fact that your dear husband was the one who was able to keep his mouth shut, because this was the one I was like, okay, I'm going to cover this, but keep her off the scent.
He did an exceptional job, and I am deeply saddened it wasn't me that told the story first.
Really?
But also delightful that it's you.
Okay. So this was one of those things that I had heard in a TikTok mentioned in passing, and I went, well, there was some nuance that my history book skipped. And that is basically how the Boston Tea Party wasn't a protest against tax per se, but smuggling.
Can I just, before you get started, can I just say I love that you gave me a modern day equivalent that was us breaking into the Sacramento airport.
For my next trick.
Exactly.
I mean, but that was just basically like, let's think about like what this means, what this entails, because it's so easy for us to be like, yeah, it's a Boston Tea Party. This is what we studied in school. It's 5th grade. We made the little diorama of a boat.
And a hat. And a brick of tea.
And some cellophane ocean waves. And
yeah.
some caffeinated sharks, because there were sharks in Bay of Boston. I don't know if you knew that, but they were in my diorama. All right. Anyhow, tea, perfect for smuggling. It's lightweight. It's subject to British duties. It's in high demand. And during the 18th century, people in the British Empire want tea. People in the British Empire still want tea. And the East India Company, I might refer to them here on out as the EIC, because writing that out over and over again in my notes was taxing. They had a monopoly on selling tea in GB, Great Britain.
If you will.
Yeah. So the East India Company is kind of an interesting thing. And like, you know it, but you may not remember all of these things, right? Like, they are a company, they are an army, they are a government, they are an entity, right? They are just massive.
They are a monopoly. They are like the Amazon of the 18th century.
They are, but it's so History Doesn't Suck, the podcast. They talked about how, since they had their own army and parliament of it, were shareholders of it, that it was such a big thing. It's basically like thinking about joining Starbucks Frappuccino paratrooper unit. Like,
that's an image I will never get out of my head.
You're welcome. But it's, you think of it just like that.
Yeah.
Like Captain Jack Sparrow went up against East India Company.
Yeah, he sure did.
And so, but it's like, okay, oh yeah, those are things that exist in history and not, made up for a movie. So the East India Company gets a blessing from even Queen Elizabeth I to, develop this full thing. So Lizzie won up, gives her blessing, knights the shoulders of capitalism, and carries forth. So it's about this.
I heard knights the shoulders of capitalism and carries Thor. And now I have a comic book sketch going on.
I mean, it wouldn't be Lizzie one that did that. It'd be our Lord and Savior, Walt Disney.
Okay, all right, carry on.
Yeah. So the East India Company, they've got a monopoly on tea because they are the sole allowed importers of tea from Canton, China to England.
That makes sense.
And that's where the British Treasury places, some really high duties on it. And then once the tea lands in Great Britain, it gets hit with an importation tax. And that's where it's sold to wholesalers, and it gets another round of taxes. And then every time it's passed on, it gets another round of taxes. Now, many of our European countries, they also have access to Canton China and have the ability to buy tea. But the problem is they don't really drink tea. They don't really use tea, but they like the idea of smuggling it to Great Britain and its colonies. And so
I
they would do
mean,
that.
if you can stick it to the man and make a buck.
Yeah. I mean, look, you're already there buying silk, buying rye, but whatever you're going to buy,
Spices.
like that's just another commodity and it's lightweight. All you have to do is get on a boat, smuggle it to England, sell it on the coast, and then turn a profit and come back home. Just don't get caught by anybody in a red coat and you're fine.
Yeah.
Now this does kind of put a weird buff like thing on it because you have these European countries who import their own Chinese tea to either England or to the colonies, and then it gets distributed. Well, leading up to the revolution, we have smugglers working in a network between Europe and the British Isles that upgraded their ships to be better armed, faster, larger,
better,
like
stronger, faster.
Exactly. Like they systematize this whole process. And that just cracks me up to think about. It's easy for us nowadays to talk about globalization and a global market and everything like that, but this is hundreds of years in the making. These smugglers even get their shipments insured through Lloyd's of London. Are you familiar with
Lloyd's? Yeah.
The Lloyd's of London? You know, so it could be Mick Jagger's lips. It could be
Heidi Klum's legs.
Gene Simmons'
Kit Harington's hair.
Yeah.
Whose tongue?
Gene Simmons.
Oh, Gene Simmons' tongue. I heard you wrong.
Yeah, his tongue.
Y'all, she gave me the best visual just then. Full on Gene Simmons' tongue out her mouth in a scream. Just saying.
I know. I'm good for it. That's what I'm bringing to this podcast. You can be assured that even in an audio format, I am bringing the visuals.
You're bringing Gene Simmons' tongue.
Mm-hmm. And so these smugglers even have lines of credit through both London and Amsterdam. Like, so this is a full-on enterprise. And it is nuts that this is an illegal trade or an illegal good. Now, as we think about it in the colonies, smuggling is rampant. One Massachusetts-based loyalist named Peter Oliver wrote, "It was notorious that smuggled teas were carted through the streets at noonday." Like just blatant rule breaking.
The term here is moral turpitude.
I mean, city dwellers refer to smuggling as merely unlawful rather than just unjust.
I mean, because they're getting the tea too. So what do they care?
Right. You know, and this, if you think about it, market forces, if your tea is too expensive, we will find another alternative.
In fact.
And so if you want to sell more goods, you need a lower price or you need to have less goods available.
In fact.
These are things. So smuggling, as it was back in late 1700s, is pretty easy to accomplish. You either have to lie about the provenance of the goods or you just have to hide them from custom officials. And one of the articles I read detailed where you could hide things and smuggle things. And it just cracked me up that somebody sat through and went, "No, but you could roll it up in here and you could hide it under here." I was like, okay, yeah, I've seen a lot of things about smuggling, right? I'm not going to say that I am a well-trained expert, but it just, you know
some things.
I've seen a couple things about the cartel, right? Like I understand, modern day drug trade, and it feels weird to think about this for Earl Grey. The problem with the smuggling in general back during this time is it's not uncommon for the same custom officials that are supposed to be cracking down on it to be actually a part of the smuggling rings. And this is especially prevalent before Parliament starts reforming the customs service in 1764. So we're winding up to 1773.
Okay.
So morale in the colonies is so bad in 1767 that Lieutenant Governor Cadwallader Colden, that name just makes me, it's nails on chalkboard, just the way it's written, just Cadwallader. I don't know. The name sounds like needing to pick up a pile of wet paper towel.
I was gonna say it reminds me of where the term like mollywop, but I like your answer much better.
I mean, it's just obviously I've got a sensory issue there, but not a pleasant sensation to see written on a page. But he wrote, no officer at this time dare make a seizure in the colonies where all restraints on trade are unpopular and where it may be seized in power of a single man to set a mob upon him.
Okay.
So, like, I mean, we see this guy just carting tea through the streets, and we're just gonna let him because I don't like pitchforks and torches. Thanks. Okay,
Yeah.
bye.
I mean, he's got the goods we want. He's like the Robin Hood of tea.
I literally don't get paid enough for this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So smuggling is also very difficult to trace in larger cities like New York. And this was something I found very interesting. The journal article that I found talks about how many of trading firms in New York had Dutch roots and they were a part of Dutch companies or were partners with Dutch firms. Now, Anglo traders conflated the word Dutch with Deutsch. And so basically all Northern Europe is one chunk. Everything's related. No, there's no nuance. So if it's French tea, it's referred to as Dutch tea.
But checks.
Basically, Americans have always been bad at geography. That's my takeaway.
Yeah, I feel like you're not wrong.
And so even in a port city like New York, a good's origins were nebulous at best. Is
Okay.
it Dutch tea or is it just legal tea brought from a Dutch company? Like maybe
We
a
don't
little
know.
of both.
A little column A, a little column B, have a nice cup of tea.
Exactly, right? I'm going to have, breakfast tea to think about it. So we also have issues of like Philadelphians who are connected to these markets in New York and are buying the smuggled tea and then further disseminating it through their distribution networks, further separating it from the smuggler. Everything's just all convoluted. During this time, it's estimated that 3/4 of all the tea in British North America were smuggled, and that might be conservative.
That makes me happy.
Smuggled tea accounts for 18.5% of the value of all imports during this time.
You said 18.5%?
Yeah. So nearly a fifth of all imports.
Yeah, that's impressive.
So, the TLDR, Americans wanted tea as cheap as they could get it, and they don't care about legality.
Seems very American to me.
You're not wrong. I mean, I'm glad to see us staying true to our roots. So 1767, England, they really seek to fix some of these things. They repeal the Indemnity Act on tea and refund the 25% tax on tea that's been exported to Ireland and North America. First off, 25% tax, that's the markup.
That's wild.
I mean, truly, when you think about all the taxes at every level, it gets up to about 50%.
Yeah.
So, but just the initial, we'll just shave 25% tax off
Call it
the
good.
top. And then they impose a 3 penny per pound tax on the imported tea. And Richard Clark, who is one of the largest tea importers in Boston, thought the first part makes sense, but said the 3 penny tax did nothing to curb smuggling. It's like, I mean, you made it cheaper, but then you just added another tax.
Yeah, that's not really helping.
No.
You're not great at math.
And so not all of the colonies smuggled tea equally. And do you remember back in episode 24 when you covered Penelope Barker, who lived in the South?
Mm-hmm.
Smuggled tea is more uncommon in Southern colonies.
That makes sense.
Yeah, you're further away from the distribution network. Meanwhile, in Boston and other northern cities, non-importation agreements discouraged imports from Great Britain, opting for Dutch tea to the tune of 180,000 pounds sterling per year. That's in 1767. So in today's money, that's 32 million pounds or 40 million in USD.
Okay.
Now, the Sons of Liberty, they're basically the ones policing the non-importation goods. Basically, they're like, we're not taking any. They're with the Penelope Barkers. They're like, we're not importing any British goods. We
Yeah.
are staunchly opposed.
Yeah.
So they're doing this both loudly and violently. Small problem. Despite this group of separatists policing these non-importation agreements, there's proof that Boston not only imports legal tea, but they reship it to other colonies.
Oh.
John Mine, a printer of the Boston Chronicle, publishes figures that proves that the Sons of Liberty were hypocritical, opportunistic, and unfair, and he prints cargo manifests of all the imported goods.
Oh.
Like he
Okay.
comes with receipts. And
Yeah.
this implicates merchants allied with the Sons of Liberty, including one John Hancock.
The John Hancock.
The big signature, ain't no room for the rest of you to sign this yearbook, John Hancock.
Yeah.
And in the colonies, Boston develops a reputation for, quote, casual lapses in upholding the non-importation and makes a mockery of their efforts. New York and Philadelphia blame Boston for the tea tax continuing to be levied against them. They're like, yo, if we could all hold a united front, they would drop this tax, but you guys keep shit in the bed.
Very American.
I mean, there's always going to be one problem child.
Always.
If we had enough tea going to Florida, it would have been Miami.
That seems weird.
Drinking tea in Miami?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not wrong. So, October 1770, the Bostonians sullenly ended their non-importation agreement and then began ordering British goods. They cave entirely. They're like, you know what? You're right. We're not good at it. We're just going to go back to ordering and paying taxes and all the cool stuff.
Legal. We're going straight, man.
Yeah. It's just we just need them fine goods, them draperies,
Porcelain.
the lead, the glass, the paper. We want it all.
Not homespun silk.
I don't think the mulberry worms were coming from China to America to do the silk. I mean, you were getting some homespun cotton, some real rough crap. You weren't getting silk.
I'm saying.
All right. So fall of 1773, there's news of a tea act that reaches the colonies. It doesn't impose any new taxes, but it gives merchants, refunds that makes the tea cheaper for American consumers. And this stirs up the Sons of Liberty, who are now afraid that it'll cause the colonists to drink legal tea.
Oh no, heavens, they be legal.
Well, and the crazy thing is as they're doing this, like as, Britain is doing a lot of these reforms to try to encourage legal tea drinking, they're noticing an uptick of legal tea drinking in England, because apparently even the British were drinking quite a bit of smuggled tea.
I mean, listen, they all want their tea,
Right? And so part of the tea acts and what they're doing, the East India Company actually gets a little bit more power than they originally had, which is saying quite a bit. They're able to appoint their own consignees at 4 of the American points. Now, this means that they can sell their tea to basically only these consignees. They don't have to go to the standard wholesalers. And then the wholesalers now have to buy from these consignees. So this is a very lucrative post. You're guaranteed to make money.
Right. Okay.
And these appointments extend the East India Company's monopoly from the tea trade in the Pacific all the way through to the Atlantic Ocean. And then one New York consignee, Benjamin Booth, writes, the only persons suspected of making opposition are the smugglers, all professed Sons of Liberty. So it's not the merchants or anybody in the middle who are actually standing to lose their livelihood. It's only smugglers. That's, of course, what this guy thinks, because he's sitting pretty with the nepotistic appointment.
Yeah, there you go.
So this is the full setup. All the chess pieces are on the board. And it's
what I bet?
Yeah.
I totally didn't mean to interrupt, but you know what I was just thinking? I bet you our pirates were involved in this.
No, because they didn't move to the US until, I think they didn't move to the US until 1800 or so.
Yeah, but you're still smuggling.
You might be, but I mean, this is 30 years before that.
Yeah, smuggling is always smuggling in the US.
Jean and Pierre Lafitte were not infants in their mother's arms on the bow of a ship smuggling. I'm just going to float this out there.
I wasn't saying I wasn't saying as babies.
I mean, the timeline. Time works in a linear fashion, at least how we experience it. Anyhow,
That's how we experience it.
okay.
Anyway, carry on.
So the East India Company, they have 7 contracted ships that are coming to American colonies. 4 of them are headed to Boston. Now, Boston has this history of fouling things up and letting things through. So they're banking on Boston letting this legal tea in the country, and it's the safest northern port that they have.
Okay.
And the EIC knows that of these 4 large shipments of tea, it'll make it absolutely cheaper than the smuggled tea that's going to flood the market.
Right.
So
here's the part where we break into the Sacramento airport.
Here we go. So now the Sons of Liberty are super pissed off. They can't allow the legal tea into the country. So the Sons of Liberty members in New York and Philadelphia, they react swiftly and harshly. The Boston team, not so stiffly. They're maintaining their roots. New York and Philly released pamphlets and articles in newspaper threatening any local merchant accepting tea consignments from the firm of Richard Clark and Sons, a firm that's firmly in bed with the EIC.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the Clarks, they're arguing that cheaper tea is going to benefit the consumer, the end user. They state that it's weird that Americans are suddenly complaining about this tax when they've been paying it for the last 6 years. They're also not complaining on the tax on wine, sugar, or molasses.
Okay.
They're like, yo, pull your heads out of your ass. You're already doing it. You've been doing it. Why are we so upset about it right now? Like, kiddo, your bedtime's always been 8 o'clock. Why are you rioting?
That's a fair question.
So this article is in favor of legal tea, is argued that the EIC enjoyed the monopoly on tea and hoarded it to inflate the prices, which caused the tea smuggling in the first place. If the tea smuggling wasn't so highly priced, then there'd be no temptation to smuggle it. So they're fighting on both sides, right? Nobody's happy. Despite I mean, honestly, it makes me feel a lot more calm to know that our newspapers were always so biased.
Yeah.
So despite the fights in newspapers, both American smugglers and merchants hate the Tea Act, and the EIC and its hand-picked consignees have a huge advantage over everyone else. Oh, I forgot. The consignees, they also make a 6% commission that's thrown in. That's just pure nepotism.
Perfect.
One of the consignees for Boston is the son of the governor of Massachusetts. So, yeah.
He did not have a clue how to do that job.
Well, I mean, it just goes to show that, it's all who you know.
Yeah.
And the Sons of Liberty, with all of this set up, they're afraid that the cheapened tea might inspire people to imperial allegiance, which feels like a weird thing for me. It's like, this tea makes me love the king.
He is buying their love.
Da 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 da. So
thank you. Thank you so much.
I know. Philadelphia consignees were, quote, anxious to hear further from Boston and to know the measures pursued there. So everybody is watching Boston.
This checks.
And it's at this point that we have a combination of geography and weather that start helping us roll dice. We have the Dartmouth, which is one of the 4 ships bound for Boston. It gets there November 28th. And so keep this in your noodle because it's important. The next ship arrives in South Carolina. Now, the northern ports don't learn about the South Carolina ship until the end of December.
Okay.
And then we have the Polly, which goes up the Delaware River, and then the other 3 Boston-bound ships. So once the Dartmouth arrives in Boston, the Sons of Liberty are convinced that they're the only ones standing up to the British. They're the only ones who've gotten a ship as far as they know. And they have a history of being sloppy. So they've got a lot of mistakes to make up for. All they want to do is send the tea back to London untouched, because as soon as that tea exits the ship, they get slapped with taxes.
Right. Okay.
Meanwhile, the local government officials and consignees from the East India Company are insisting that they get on that boat and unload it. So
Okay.
there's tension as they're trying to do they're just dock workers trying to do their job.
Right.
And then the Sons of Liberty are out there like, oh no, you can't go. I don't know what they were chanting, but I'm imagining picketers.
I'm shocked there was not more dock workers that were in the Sons of Liberty.
Unclear. I didn't do the research, but it could be that they were all dock workers. I mean, not all, but so the ships that are carrying the company's tea arrive in Philadelphia and New York, but they choose to return to England without unloading rather than facing the angry mobs.
Because New York doesn't play games.
Yeah, like they literally like, I don't get paid enough for this shit. Like I am just, nope.
Turn it around.
Yeah. Sam Adams ends up being the lawyer who is supporting the owner of one of the ships in Boston.
Okay.
And he counsels his client and says, just send it back and say that, it was too treacherous because there were storms. It was damaged or storms. I can't remember how it was worded, but basically there were storms. And he was saying because it's political storms, not
physical storms.
Yeah. It's
okay.
not a meteorological storm, but it's a political storm. And you're returning the tea from the political storm.
Keeping it safe in the hands of London. Gotcha.
So Massachusetts, however, the royal governor that's been appointed by the British, he refuses to allow the ship carrying the company's tea to leave the harbor without paying the tax first. So he's locked it in there. He's like, nah, it doesn't leave.
This checks.
Yeah. Now we get to the evening of December 16th, 1773. We have protesters, some disguised as Native Americans. They board the 3 ships in the Boston Harbor and they throw out 342 chests of the East India tea into the water. This is a large loss for the East India Company, and the tea was worth well over $1 million.
Back then or today?
Today.
Okay.
But it's like 46 tons of tea.
Yeah, that's a lot of tea.
It's not a small amount. And the only person who was injured got knocked out with a tea chest on accident because he was being a dumbass and zigged when he should have zagged. I take it back. There's another guy who got his ass beat from trying to put the tea into his pockets, and his compatriots were like, absolutely not.
No, we're dumping it.
Yeah, it's all in the harbor. The day after the Tea Party, the day after the Boston Tea Party, Reverend Samuel Cooper described it as wanting to second their brethren in other colonies, that they wanted to diminish their culpability in the destruction of the East India Company. He's like, look, we knew our brothers were doing it. We knew New York and Philadelphia had strong feels. We had to do this to just stand up with them. This wasn't us. It was just standing in solidarity. That's it.
Interesting, because the other 2 cities had it together and got the boats turned around.
But so they couldn't in Boston, and they really, really, really tried. The owner of the boat was like, I mean, just send it back. And governor's like, absolutely not. And they go to the customs official, and the customs official were like, yeah, no, not so much, but we can unload it for you.
How about we unload it? You want me to unload it?
Yeah, absolutely not. And so it was hours before the tea would be seized by officials, because once the boat stayed in the harbor for X number of days, I think it was 20 days, then they had the authority to go on board and take it.
Oh, okay.
And so it was just day of, the owner of the boat was arguing with the governor for hours and hours and hours. And then 5 p.m. he comes into Old Southie, the meeting place, where he's like, yeah, I can't do it. I tried my best, wipe my hands off. And that's when the Sons of Liberty come dressed up as Indians and go cosplaying and LARPing down the street.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm here for it. I mean, we had to do a callback to previous episodes. Now, another thing that I didn't necessarily recognize is the Boston Tea Party actually inspired similar other actions. There were protests very similar to this that occurred in Edenton, North Carolina, which, oh my gosh, that was Penelope Barker's.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Sorry, I just made that connection.
Don't
Silly me.
apologize. It's a beautiful connection to make.
I know, but I should have done it intentionally. It sounded, confident when I made it, as opposed to being like, there was another one in like Edenton, kind of.
Sounds
Also,
kind of familiar, vaguely familiar. I don't know why though.
yeah, Yorktown, Virginia had another protest, and then news of the destruction of tea is what causes outrage in England. And
As it
instead of,
does.
yeah, I mean, look, we all like the thing, and you destroyed it. I mean, it's like if nowadays if you destroyed Tito's vodka, I think the entire left coast would just riot. Now, when this happens, instead of repealing the Tea Act, Parliament decides they're going to punish Boston and the people of Massachusetts. So they close the port in Boston in June of 1774, along with issuing the Intolerable Acts. And this gives colonies one more reason to resent Parliament and move a step closer to declaring their independence.
I love this all over tea.
Right. And it wasn't necessarily over tea, it was over the smuggling and our founding fathers being absolute cartel holders. Like, and that's the nuance my history book missed, but maybe I was also a fifth grader who wouldn't understand.
Did not know what the cartel was. No, I really think genuinely history doesn't tell the back end of that story at all.
No, I mean, because you look at the articles and it's just like a bunch of people were upset over the tea tax and they threw the tea in the harbor. And
Okay,
then
but
the
why?
revolution.
Ta-da!
It's like, but the smugglers, the Dutch, it's the Dutch's fault. They stirred the pot. Without the Dutch, we would have never done it. We'd still have the king on our money, or,
Hmm. Thanks.
I don't know. I really don't.
I'm conflicted because I really would have let Lizzie 2 take me back.
I mean, when I think about how Vancouver, Washington used to be British soil, it was like one of the last territories that the British gave up. And people were saying, make America great again. My snarky ass was like, make Vancouver British again.
Yes. There was an Onion article that came out about Queen Elizabeth deciding to take back the colonies. I want to say 2014, 2015, and it was like one of the funniest articles because I was like, yes, ma'am. I've already worked my curtsy out.
Yeah, please and thank you. I won't abandon coffee, but I will adopt more tea.
I don't drink coffee, so tea works for me.
Yeah, I don't think Pepsi though is the drug of choice for the.
I have not had Pepsi since Halloween. I think about it every day. That was the hardest one to give up.
I see your fiending in your eyes.
Do you?
I do. The longing.
Yeah. One day.
Stare off into mid-distance.
I just keep thinking about my birthday and how I will have a Pepsi on my birthday. And it'll be amazing.
In a Pepsi flavored cake.
I like your style.
I'm nothing if not classy. As
keep it classy.
Yeah, as documented in the Pepsi cake. All right, but that's the story of the Boston Tea Party.
I loved your story of the Boston Tea Party. Do you want to hear my story? But I have to start with questions.
I mean, to be fair, I had to take you on a merry jaunt of us breaking into an airport.
That's true. What is the most Canadian thing, or more specifically Canadian crime, you can think of?
The maple syrup murder or maple syrup heist.
December 17th is National Maple Syrup Day. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
In fact,
are you covering the maple syrup heist?
I am.
Hell yes.
So you can imagine my panic there at the beginning when you talked about breaking into the airport, and I was like,
oh God,
we're smuggling. Oh,
Ian, you set this up, you rat bastard.
He lied to both of us.
Honestly, him keeping a secret and him playing both sides to orchestrate this, both check.
100%. And he could do it with a straight face. Either way, would have been golden.
At the beginning of this, I loved him. And at this moment, I hate him.
Or do you love him more because you know he'd do it?
No, no. I mean, at this point, it's Tombstone. It's
Now I really hate
now
him.
I hate Brienne.
Can I just say that over the however 45 episodes we've recorded, Tombstone gets brought up at least half the time.
You're not wrong.
Because it is the most quotable movie on the planet.
It is perfect. It is up there with The Princess Bride.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I said what I said.
You're not wrong. I stand with you. This is the hill we will die on together.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Honestly, that is the best compliment. You think about it because you're like, I just need something with a little bit of violence.
Yeah.
Both play out.
Perfect.
I needed a bit more slapstick. Go to Princess Bride.
Yeah. I need to see Val Kilmer.
You go the other direction.
That Val Kilmer, I guess I should say.
Yes, true.
Because you could pick many other Val Kilmers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm covering the Great Maple Syrup Heist. My sources are a handful of articles from The Guardian because The Guardian thoroughly covered the events during and after.
Okay.
One of my favorite titles, Sticky Situations. Maple Syrup Bandits face Quebec court for infamous heist. That's by The Guardian. The Canadian Encyclopedia has a great article on it by Tyler Noax. That article comes from March of 22. There is another March 2022 article written for Forbes magazine. Ringleader of the Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist ordered to pay multi-million-dollar fine. These headlines are literally my favorite thing ever. NPR article, thieves hit warehouse holding 30 million of Canadian maple syrup. Glorious. Okay, so a handful of fun facts. Did you know that Canada has a strategic maple syrup reserve?
Is this like our cheese cave?
I was thinking more like Fort Knox, but okay, cheese
You know
cave.
about our cheese cave?
I don't. You're gonna have to tell me about the cheese cave.
There is a cave in the Midwest. I can't think of the exact location, but it is a strategic cheese reserve.
Thank you for this information. My youngest son bows to you. I now have to take him to a cheesecake, I guess. Cheese cave. So yeah,
You could have cheesecake en route to cheese cave.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to assume it's the same thing. It is called the Strategic Maple Reserve, Maple Syrup Reserve, and I just need you to know that the word strategic messes with me every single time I try to say it. I never say it right. So there you go. When I said the phrase strategic maple syrup reserve out loud, Owen, my weeest one, he who loves the cheese, said, I got you. That means you're Canadian. I love him so much. So 72% of the world's maple syrup supply is sourced from Quebec. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah. According to Taste of Home, Quebec produces an astounding amount of syrup each year. 7,989 gallons.
That's not a little bit.
No, the runner-up is Vermont with only 890,000 gallons, followed by Ontario, Canada, New York, and Maine.
But but hold on. When I think about it, Quebec is not a city, it's a province, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a big province. There's a lot of ground versus Vermont, which is a piddly little state. It's not the size of California.
That's true, but
you know what I mean?
Is also, I mean, how many times does 890,000 go into 7.9 million?
Look, this is not a math podcast, right?
Right. Either way, it's a ton no matter what, right? So at the time of the heist, maple syrup was valued at approximately 13 times the price of crude oil. Some of my sources suggest that today it's worth 30 times the price of crude oil, which I think is absolutely wild, right?
We need green energy. And more maple
Maple
syrup run
syrup.
vehicles,
I mean, they imagine how good the roads would smell. People would eat more breakfast, I guarantee it.
right? We'd all have diabetes, but I mean,
Maple syrup flavored diabetes. It takes 18 kilos of maple tree sap to make just half a kilo of syrup. So there's that.
what uh, I'm now confused with how this works. Like I thought that you put it the little tap in the tree and what comes out is maple syrup.
So I'm not an expert on this, but this is my understanding of it. Oh, because my final source is an episode of Dirty Money on Netflix. Um, I believe they tap the tree, right? And the
Yeah.
sap is what comes out of the tree, and then that gets distilled down into syrup. I'm unclear on the whole process, but that's the way I understand it.
Okay.
So I'm going to set the scene for you real quick. Between the years 2011 and 2012, the Federation, which the Federation, if you ask, well, they are the Federation of Maple Syrup Producers, an organization that represents nearly 7,000 syrup producers and controls nearly 80% of the world's maple syrup supply.
In other news, there are 7,000 maple syrup producers.
Yeah, in Quebec.
In Quebec? This makes me
Wild,
feel like
right?
Holly Golightly in Breakfast at Tiffany's, where she's got like all of the richest people just in tune, like just programmed into her brain.
Yeah.
Like I
It,
need to if Hubs wanders in front of a bus, I need to find a maple syrup bear.
you do. You really do. So so the Federation, which is in the process, like I said earlier, it's between the years of 2011 and 2012. The Federation is in the process of constructing a new state-of-the-art warehouse to store approximately 50,000 tons of maple syrup, representing 50% of the typical year's harvest from the province. The province is 44 million taps.
Good night.
Right? So during this transition period, 10% of their supply is kept in a rented warehouse southwest of Quebec City in a place that please forgive me, Saint Louis de Blanfort, which is, it's got a full-time guard living in the apartment above. So mind you, that's 10% of their supply is housed in this warehouse southwest of Quebec City because
And
that's
there's a
cheap.
guard who lives above, which it
Yeah.
went from sounding state of the art with its own federation overseeing it to
Well,
now
so
feeling like it's in some provincial town.
like it's in a storage locker downtown, right?
Yeah. And
So that
bro
is
lives above the coffee
because
shop.
right. That is because the Federation is in the process of building a new warehouse. So this
Okay.
portion is being just stored there. So once a year, the facilities are inventory inspected. So in July of 2012, Inspector Michael, I'm going to butcher this, Garvey, who works for the OPEC maple syrup producers, the older name for the FPAC, which is the Federation. Yes, they go by FPAC like OPEC. So there's that.
I mean, this is
Seems
this is getting wilder.
right. So Michael is counting the reserves at the temporary facility. And to quote the words of Simon Trepanier, the executive director of the FPAC, they tightly regulate the production and the sales of the region's maple syrup. So he says, quote, when he, referring to the inspector, climbed on one pile, he basically grabbed the top barrel, and because it was empty, it was not 600 pounds, but maybe 40 pounds. So he tried to grab it, and then it almost fell. This is how they determined that some barrels were filled with water and some were empty.
Very scientific.
Right? At this point, the FPAC figures out that they have been robbed of 9,561 or maybe 9,571 barrels. Differing sources say different things, but 9,500 barrels have been gone missing.
A shit ton of maple syrup has flooded the market.
Worth nearly 18 million Canadian dollars.
So $5 American. I'm joking. That wasn't even kind.
This investigation leads to police raids in New Brunswick, Ontario, and as far south as Vermont and New Hampshire. and they are wholly convinced by this point it is an inside job.
I
Funny
mean,
enough, in these raids, they seize forklifts, 4 ginormous kettles used to boil down the syrup, and tanker trucks, which were used to transport the syrup. So I have this image of like a gas tanker truck, right? Like
yeah. I mean,
that's what
like,
I'm picturing,
have
but
you
full of
seen the
syrup.
big ones that like the big gas tanker trucks, but it says like milk on the
Yeah,
side? Yeah.
imagine that, but syrup. So about this time, 25 people are brought in for questioning, 16 are arrested, and it's determined that Richard Valliere was the group's leader. He was already known as, quote, a barrel roller, which is basically someone who's figured out ways around the tight regulations of control and supply. So he is a smuggler. He is found guilty of fraud, trafficking, and theft, and in 2016, he is sentenced to 7 years, 10 months in prison. He receives the harshest penalty for all the arrested in this case. He was also fined $9.4 million and was given 10 years to pay it, or 6 years in prison. So you have 10 years to pay, $9.4 million, or you get another 6 years on your term.
But who has that just in their couch? And if you're in prison, how are you going to rummage through and earn?
Well, so the way that I understand it, and if our listener out there has a little bit more clarity on this, the way that I understood it, once his initial time was served, his 7 years and 10 months, he then had 10 years to pay it back, or he would serve another 6 years. Like, so
I
he would
mean,
have to report back, right? Like, that's the way that I understand it.
I would look to expatriating to a country that doesn't have extradition.
You would think. Um, there's some pretty funny bits that come in here, but one of the conspirators, quotes, claimed that their actions were not theft as the FPAC supply management practices were unfair to producers. Um, Valaris himself says that he was coerced to do it by a man who carried a gun. That doesn't hold water at all. Like later on, it makes no sense to me that he would say that, but I think it was just a last minute attempt to maybe get a lesser sentence.
Well,
And
it's to implicate Americans. That's what it is.
probably, yeah. Um, and as I said, the syrup had a market value of more than 18 million Canadian dollars, which is in American money $14.4 million. He said
Wait,
at
so
his
what you're
trial,
saying is apples to orange or apples to apples, the maple syrup heist was 14 times
the tea heist.
the tea heist.
Yes. um, Valliere says, excuse me, I pronounced his last name wrong a few moments ago, but Valliere says at his trial that he actually sold it at a lower price. I think he's saying that in hopes to get out of paying such a high fine. Because Canada has some pretty interesting laws in regards to theft and what you're required to pay back. So I think he was just hoping for a lower fine at the end.
Mm.
Um, Additionally, his father Raymond, as well as a New Brunswick-based reseller called, wait for it, Eotine Saint Pierre, were also found guilty. Is Eotine Saint Pierre not the most French name you've ever heard in your life?
Is it Etienne?
Etienne Saint Pierre.
I mean, that
Yeah,
is very French.
right? As well as a man called Yvette Caron, and he was the husband of one of 4 people who owned the warehouse where the syrup was being temporarily stored.
That's
It
still
was
a ton of people involved.
so many people, right? It was Caron who made the offer to Valliere to steal the liquid gold. In 2017, Caron received a 5-year prison term and a 1.2 million fine. As of 2017, all 3 men were appealing their convictions. Recently, though, in early 2022, during his 3rd parole hearing, because he was denied 2 prior times, he stated that he planned the heist for profit and as a retribution for a 2007 fine of $1.8 million that the FPAC had imposed on him for selling the liquid gold on the black market.
So he'd already been busted for it previously, and in
Yes.
protest, he decided to do it again.
Yeah, because we're super brilliant about this. Now it should be said that FPAC doesn't have the love of the people. There are a lot that call it mafia with its scare tactics and totalitarian. Oh my
Proletarian?
gosh, thank you. Rule and cartel. They can compare it to a cartel.
Wait a minute. So there is a mob that controls the supply of maple syrup.
That's what the growers akin it to. Yes.
I really need to think about my second marriage. I've got to orchestrate getting into the maple syrup air.
I mean, you're and flannel. Think of how comfortable you'll be.
And flannel. Like, but flannel like from the big flowy with
Yes.
the boa
Mm-hmm.
sleeves where I just like look like a lumberjack princess
Yes.
flowing through the hallways.
My queen, in fact.
I could say a boot, an A.
There you go.
I love cheese and gravy. I can put that on fries. I'm good with this. Angie, I have
Perfect.
found my calling.
You're welcome. I didn't know this was going to lead to a life-changing event, but here we are. Sorry, Mike.
Just keep praying that Mike stays healthy and I'll stay as I am. But without that, I will seek a new life
As a
as a maple mob
syrup,
princess.
I love this for us because I'm only going to benefit as well.
Right? Just
Um,
casks of grade A maple syrup coming your direction.
It'd be glorious. And then I'm going to get fined by FPAC
No,
for
mine will
receiving
all be
goods.
legit because I'm going to be part of the family.
That's true. That's true. Um, so there are all types of litigations and all sorts of lawsuits that involve the FPAC. So the gist is they're not friendly and they keep real tight rules on how this is all supposed to be done, and the growers are just trying to live their lives, right? Um, Valliere is appealing the fine portion of his case, but Canadian law, like I said, has some interesting thoughts on that, and the Guardian has the best way to describe it. Quote, on appeal, the amount was reduced to only 1 million. The amount my gosh. The amount Valliere claimed to be the profit on his theft. But on Thursday, Canada's top court disagreed, arguing that a court doesn't have the power to diminish a fine, that the original fine should be restored. Distinguishing between an offender's income and expenses in order to determine the offender's profit margin would essentially amount to legitimating criminal activity, is what the courts write. The court then said lawmakers in Canada had drafted the criminal code to deprive offenders of the fruits of their crime and to defer them. Parliament is sending a clear message that crime doesn't pay and thus is attempting to discourage individuals from organizing themselves and committing profit-driven crimes. The court writes, it continues, he was ordered to pay the fine of more than 9 million Canadian dollars, which is 7.2 million US dollars. And I don't know why, but when I read that, I could not help but laugh because Canada is so polite that they're like, listen, our whole goal is for you to pay this fine so you will not be enticed to do it again. But here he is doing it again anyway.
Well, I've only done it twice.
I know, right? And I got prison time. Gosh. Allow me to regale you with a couple of more blurbs and a couple more headlines and a blurb about the case. I already told you about the sticky situation maple syrup bandits face Quebec courts. Maple syrup heist. Quebec producers bounce back from sticky situation. Sappy ending. Canada digs deep into strategic reserve to cover maple syrup shortage.
Shortage. A shortage.
Wait, it gets better. A poor harvest season and booming demand has prompted Quebec's syrup cartel to release around 22,000 tons of the luscious liquid. And wait for it, my favorite one. Trade war. Canadians horrified to learn that some maple syrup is from the US.
I mean, look, we have sullied their shelves.
We absolutely had. The Montreal Gazette says, quote, as suspects were being rounded up, the heist made news around the world and was fodder for comedians who joked about a crime that could only be carried out in Canada. The same Gazette says, funny enough, this is not funny to Canadian harvesters. And the Guardian follows up with, north of Montreal, Normand Urbain, a fourth-generation maple syrup producer, is busy checking some of the taps of his 7,000 maple trees before the forthcoming harvest. Like many producers, he was stunned by the heist and still smarts at the ridiculing the industry received from comedians in the U.S.
Like, look, we don't have the nationalized health care. We've got a lot of other issues. Let us make fun of your maple syrup
Like
problems.
one time, man.
For once, we're drowning out Florida man. Would you let us be?
Please. And that is the absolutely ridiculous story of the Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist of 2012. Now, that being said, there have been previous maple syrup heists.
I love this.
There was one in 2003. We don't have any information on that one because every time you try to find any information anywhere, this is the one that comes up, but it kind of mentions it in the wings, you know. So if anybody has some details on the 2003 maple syrup
If
heist,
you are a
I'd
part
love
of the
that.
maple mob and you've got access, please unhinged.historypod@gmail.com.
Also, if you are looking to be Theresa's second husband,
Shh, no, because Mike is still alive and counted for. Like, I am not redoing again if I don't have to. But I'm just
okay.
saying, I'm now developing options.
So yeah, that's my story.
I am going to tell Mike that you're trying to bury me off into the maple syrup mob.
Okay.
He's going to have significant questions and concerns about us continuing this podcast.
But are you going to tell him that it was your idea first?
Stop it. Quit twisting this around like we're recording it or something.
I'm not really trying to marry you off. I like you the way you are with the human you're with. He seems quite suited to be your life mate.
Very true. There's very few people who can deal with these antics.
See, here we are.
Well, that was delightful. I have loved this.
Me too. I love both of our stories were about smuggling.
And not about the same smuggling.
Yeah, I've got to go high five my husband now.
Well, if you have enjoyed this and you can't wait to see what we possibly do next week and what themes are going to emerge, smuggling or otherwise, because this has been a bizarrely themed episode. Join us, rate, review, subscribe, share us with your mom's dog walker's neighbor. And on that note, goodbye.
Goodbye.